temples and over 4,000 flying apsaras. In the dance in the CCTV Spring Festival galas about the Flying Apsaras. And today we have come here to find the most beautiful and intriguing patterns of Flying Apsaras. Today we are very pleasant to invite two guests from the Institute of Research of Dunhuang. Please say hello to our audiences. Hello, I am Speaker Liu Shaiyang from Dunhuang Institute. Dear audiences, hello, I am also from the Research Institute of Dunhuang. Today, our broadcast is led by Mr. Lu Shuangyang, and Ms. Chen Haiyan will also follow us to implement other contents. Okay, let's start right now. What we're seeing now is a very symbolistic temple of Mogao Grottos. This is called 9 floors, and this was first built in Tang Dynasty. It can date back to 1,300 years ago. 8 to 9 times of plaster and repair was happened. And as we can see, the top 2 floors are replicated into a shorter pattern, so the actual existence seems like 7th floor. So if you ever come here to Dunhuang, you can go into the center of the square and then get a better look. So the 9th floor is a symbolistic building in Mogao Grotto, and every time people come to here, they will think about it. And every festival, the general public would come here to celebrate and to celebrate their ancestors. And it also has the biggest Buddha figure of Maitreya. Our broadcast today will save it, and maybe in later times we will visit it. So now we're going to visit the actual Flying Apsaras. The weather in Dunhuang today is actually rather cold, but it is more than desirable, and the temperature is not as low as we expected. The only shortage is that the sunlight is not enough today, because for Dunhuang, the sun actually shines for a rather long time in the day. And the reason that Mogao Grottos is preserved such greatly is the weather. Now we are in a low season where visitors are not as much. And we have come here first before all the other visitors. So actually, we're the first batch of tourists in Mogao Grottos. As we can see right now, outside the Mogao Grotto, it is a reinforced wall body. The whole length of Mogao Grotto is 1.7 kilometers, and we divide it into 2 areas. And normally the visitors would go to the south area for sightseeing. As you can see, the walls are very smooth, and this was all reinforced in 1960s. After the reinforcement, there was also decoration put onto it. So what we're seeing now is basically integrated into the original body of Mogao Grottos. Now we're on the south area, the most popular sightseeing area. Will you have any plans to develop the north area and maybe open it to the tourists? Yes, we're planning that, and we're aiming for the tourists to see what it was like before reinforcement. We have a machine right in front of us. What is used for? This is an air supervision machine. We can test the speed and direction of wind as well as the air quality, including the PM 2.5. It involves some of the protection and preservation that we do here. The caves is in the mid-level of Mogao Grottos. It is one of the best preserved areas. From the Norse Liang dynasty. So in the early caves, the number of it which are open to the public were very few. Now we have the pleasure to see one of the first opened caves to the public. It is number 275. In the process of reinforcement, because of all these stairs, the reinforcement order is per the direction of the corridors. Now we need to watch our steps and go upward. This is somewhat exhausting, taking all these stairs. Cave number 275. Now we have arrived. This was built in Norse Liang dynasty. Let's go inside the grotto. There is one distinct feature, which is a bump. Dear audiences, please take a guess at this little bump and how long does it date back? And we will reveal the answer later. Okay, let's get inside the grotto.
现在呢，我们就来到了莫高窟第275号洞窟当中了。而至于进入整个洞窟之后啊，我们先会看到它的这个结构上。
Now we're inside of the Grotto Number 275. So from the structure, we can see that the building style is very simple, especially the ceiling. The ceiling is like the ceiling of the tent of minorities in our nation. And on our both hands, there are 6 Buddhas on both sides. But all of these look slightly differently. Their design and pattern are very different. The former two are actually from the Han Dynasty, and the two in the later comes from the India ancient Buddhism. The pattern of these Buddhas is very often seen in the early construction of Dunhuang Moga grottos. This is an integration of cultures between West and East. And now let's look for the Flying Apsaras. So in early times, the Flying Apsaras in the ceiling are actually not very blatant. It is not that easy to be seen. After the figures of Flying Apsaras, the occupation rate is really high, but the story is rather simple. People may wonder that why are these Flying Apsaras so different from what we expect? And it's like they have black eyes, just like the youngsters right now who stay up really late. And this is because of the pattern and techniques of painting, because this dates back to 1,600 years. So some change happened. Maybe these figures of Flying Apsaras seems sicker, but it's all because of the seasoning of the times. But here we can see behind us, these Flying Apsaras seems more smooth and exquisite. Their eyes and faces are clearer than what we saw before. This facet of the wall is rather fortunate because if we take a look above, there is very clear stratification of Moros, because in Ming Dynasty, these paintings were repainted. And we have moved the Flying Apsaras from Song Dynasty to the later part. Because for every painting preserved to right now, it has a history of over 1,000 years old. For the construction of the grotto and the Buddhas, the most impressive one is the Bodhisattvas. From my expression and my impression, I think the costumes and clothing are different than what I imagined, because it is not wearing as much clothes as I expected, and he's wearing a necklace. So the figure is rather simple and plain. And we have seen the style of the Moros and sculptures are actually affected by the West. The paintings are more simple, and the clothing are very tight to the bodies. Actually, this is used by different sizes of mud sticks on top of the clothing of the Bodhisattvas. So the approach is very simple, but the artistic style is exquisite. This is one of the biggest Bodhisattvas. The height is about 3.5 meters. After we come inside of this grotto, this is the one most obvious figure. Now we can go on. I am viewing the comments by audiences. If you have any questions, you may post to us and I will answer them inside this broadcast. So this little bump, like a stone, can I touch it? What is this used for? Maybe some of the audiences have the right answers. This is the base of the lights in ancient times.
祈福的活动举行。所以说我们现在看到是灯台的下半部分，而旁边黑的部分呢，
In
是当
December
灯
the
油燃尽之
8th,
后凝固所结成的块状。
prayings and blessing activities will be arranged here. So this is the base of the light. So maybe this was left 1,000 years ago. This is also a relic, a cultural relic, standing for the beliefs of the ancient ancestors. Okay, let's take a tour outside. Now the sun's out. A lot of audiences have been asking me about the black eyes. Why the black eyes were formed? It has something to do with the techniques of painting, because in early times, circles were used in paintings. For halo dyeing. So apart from the original styles, the paintings have the feature of the area as well. So in all areas, the communication were very smooth between the east and west. In 1961, it was announced that Mogao Grottos is one of the national's intangible cultural heritage. Because of the UNESCO's principles, when screening for the World Intangible Heritage, there are 6 standards. As long as you meet one standard, you can be listed. So Mogao Grotto actually meets all 6 requirements. We're seeing the Mogao Grottos right now. We can understand the long history, and now I want to advocate everybody to put your effort to preserve it and protect it. How do we protect it? Because I have seen some words written on or inside of the grottos by tourists. This is a rather unwanted and undesirable action in sightseeing sites. Because in ancient times, people would like to write inscriptions or words on walls or the sculptures to announce that they have been here. But in early times, murals or sculptures, all these was damaged to some extent. So we need to be self-conscious in protecting and preserving this kind of cultural relics. Actually, for Mogao Grotto, after a series of changes in times, this is one irreversible process. So we're only slowing down the aging and changing happened in Mogao Grotto. So we have to put every effort we can to preserve it. Now we are in Grotto number 257. Let's take a look inside to see how it is protected and preserved. As we can see, there are multiple construction styles. Now we're in the centerpiece. The first one that we have seen is actually very distinctive in Mogao Grottos, number 275. But after North Liang Dynasty, now we are in the Grotto number 257. This one is constructed in North Wei Dynasty. Maybe we can see the slight difference between this one and the former one. Because of the relationship between human and nature, the preservation of this grotto is not as desirable. The walls in the east direction of this grotto has been damaged, and later on it was
也非常的明显，我们发现摄像老师都已经为大家已经找到了，它就出现在我们看到洞窟南北两壁佛
it
说
was
法图的左右
restored and
而
repaired.
这个时候
Now
会发
where
现
is
说
the
这些飞
Flying
天的形状跟
Apsaras?
刚才275的飞天来比较
This
的
is
话，
on
又会不太一样。
the Flying
神形
Apsaras
呢
are
会
on
更加的
two
大一些，
sides.
体积呢也
Comparing
相
it
对的
with
扩大，
the
同时还有什么呢？会发
Grotto
现它飞的会变得更
275,
快。这
the
个可能跟
celestial
275
being
号洞窟
sides
来
are
比较的话，就
bigger,
会有一个非常大、非常强烈的一个对比。
and
除
their
了它们之外呢，
flying
会
is
发现它们
actually
这个身
quicker.
形啊，会相对的比较僵硬一些，
This is a
会微微变
contrast.
成一个 V 字形的体态。而且这样的形式，其实在莫高窟早期
And
洞
their
窟当中呢，
bodies
反而
are
会比较的多见。
stiffer.
而这一时期，因为可能说我们看
The
现在
body
看到画面
gesture
当
is
中的
like
形
a
象，
V.
因为离洞窟的窟口会相对比较的近，所以
And
说
this
人
is
物身上的
rather
色
less
彩，包括
seen
飘带的
in
颜色呢，
early
会
times
相对的
of
比较
Flying
模糊。但
Apsaras.
是呢，如果跟随
These
镜头稍
celestial
微往
beings
中
are
央
closer
左看上
to
方
the
来
gate of
仔
the
细看一看的
grottos.
话，会发现说飞天身后
So
锦裙的蓝色以及飘带的绿色啊，
the
会
ones
非常的
on
鲜
the
艳。
outside
而
are
它们色彩到
actually
现
a
在
little
同
bit
样也
weak,
是有
but if you look
1500
at the
多年的历史，
inside,
这都是在北魏时
the
期就保留
blue
到现在
and
的。
green color are actually very distinctive. This has been preserved to right now from North Wei
是这个飞
Dynasty.
天呢，其实我们说了这么长时间，还没有跟大家介绍一下飞天的功能和作用。
Now we're
其实
going
飞
to
天这个
inform
词语
you
呢，它
about
最早啊
the
也是出自于
numbers
佛
of
经当
figures
中的，
of
它
Flying
是由基督
Apsaras.
徒法护所
We
翻译
haven't
的
been
古妖经
formally
当中出现
introducing
最早飞
Flying
天词语的介
Apsaras.
绍。而至于说飞天呢，它基本
This
上从
phrase
佛
has
教
come
同时期
from
被传
a
入到我们的
sutra.
国家。 而在整个洞窟当中，在莫高窟当中啊，从第一个洞窟开始到
At
最
the
后一个
same
元代洞
time
窟结束，
of
基本上各
introducing
个时期
Buddhism,
都能
Flying
看到飞天的
Apsaras
出现了。
was
而至于
introduced to
说这个
China
飞
as
天的职
well.
责跟功能啊，按照佛经当中的解
In
释呢，
different
它一般会
dynasties,
被分为说
Flying
飘香、
Apsaras
散
appeared
花、
in all
奏
these
乐。 而
grottos.
飞天来讲的话呢，
According
它
to
的定义一
sutra's
般来说也会
inscription,
比较的复杂。我们一般都会把它称作是佛
there are
护
3
法当
functions
中的两类，
for
他们
Flying
是乾达
Apsaras,
婆还有
and
紧
the
拿罗。
concept
而
is
它们名
rather
字翻译过来之后的
complicated.
意思啊，就是天歌神还有天乐神了。所以说呢，在听完佛
There
法
are
之后，我们内
2
心非常的
guards
喜悦。
for
他们在天空
Buddhists,
当中撒花、奏乐、焚香等等一些
and
来娱佛
all
供佛，
these
所以
2
有点像
are
我们现在
Flying
说的为
Apsaras.
工作者的意思了。
刚才有个特
The
别眼
guards
尖的网
of
友啊，
Buddhists
我刚才
are
说到咱们的
pleasant
九色鹿
to
嘛，大家还真是挺专业的哈，能够
to work for
进
the
来能看到咱
Buddhists,
们九色鹿。
and they
大家可以
have
看到
different
现
functions for
在
the
我们
Buddhists as
在
well.
这个屏风上面啊，这里展示的这样一幅画是九色鹿，但它不是圆寂。圆寂在什么地方呢？随着镜头，好，我们一起往里看，那个地方是咱们的真正九色鹿壁画的
Now we have a
展现。为什么要把它单独的从那边拿出来？
we have a
转
mural
给大家展示。
对，
on
这个
top
时
of
候
the
啊，我们就
screen.
看
This
到
is
是
called
像刚才提到
9-color
洞窟的一个
painting,
宝
and we have
其实呢，
put
相对于很
the
多我们
the
现在的
original one
零
on
零后、
top.
10后的小朋友来讲，可
And
能
this
九
is
色鹿呢还不
another
是非常
form
高
of
级。但我
protection
相信
and
对于很多
preservation
80、
for the
90后的
grottos.
央视客户端新闻
For
的网友朋
the
友来讲的话，
children right
九色鹿
now,
是一个从小
maybe
非
they
常
don't
难以忘
understand
记的记忆。其实呢，我们现在看到这幅画作，它是后代
9-color
临摹的
painting,
原因呢，就是因为
but
让现代
for
的游客进入当中
people
也
who
能
were
看到九色鹿
born
的
in
画作。因为呢，我们原始
1980s
的画
and
作它是体现在
1990s,
洞窟的
they
西
are
壁
more
墙面之上。
familiar
可
with
是
the
说啊，就像您刚才提到，
9-color
整个洞窟它
painting.
最中央有一个四方四正的立柱，而后边的
The
通道
original
呢，翻
painting
透不出
appeared
去。
in the
所以说，为
west
了保证文物的
wall
安全
of
以及
this
游客的
grotto,
人身
but
安全，
because
飞
of
行动
the
途呢，我们是不能
width of
向
the
后绕行
corridor
的。
is rather
但是很多游
narrow,
客喜欢
so
这样
in
怎么办呢？
preserving the
觉得
grotto and protecting the
让
security
大家来
of
感
the
受一下
tourists,
九色鹿
they
的
cannot circle back to
好的。
the end of the grotto. So the staff have
好，我们
put
继续
the
下一个洞
9-color
窟啊。
painting
下
up
一个洞窟
front.
在咱们的右手边，咱们往前面走。
下一个洞
Okay,
窟
let's
呢，
go on
就
to the
是
next
到
one.
北魏洞窟啊，位置会稍微比较
The
北
next
边，
grotto is
而
on the
且
right-hand
它
side.
的层数会更高一层。我们现在呢是在这个2层的洞窟。
This
现
one
在
is
呢，我们
rather
就要往
distant
3层
from
了。
the
像现在
from the one we're
这
in.
个地方啊，就是
Now we're in the
到
second floor,
可能是
and then
上
we're
升天
going
气
to
吧，
the
这样
third floor.
不是特别的好，但是也比较有特色哈，可以说是咱们沙漠之城敦煌。
So after I arrived in Dunhuang, the weather is not desirable with the sandstorm, But this is also very distinctive in Dunhuang because Dunhuang is a city of deserts. With the improvement of the environment and weathers, the sandstorm weathers are actually less and less. So this is an experience that I can hold on to. Now we can see some wood structures appearing right in front of our eyes. On our left-hand side, there is a little cottage. This is Grotto Number 454. This was also reinforced in the later half of Qing Dynasty. There are also some of open murals on the outside of Mogao grottos. Some of them are wiped away, but after the reinforcement, the others were preserved, and they also have a history of thousands of years. In 1944, the Research Institute of Dunhuang was established, and an all-dimensional protection and preservation is completed by this entity. Apart from other techniques developing, we are also exploring collaboration and cooperation with different nations and institutes. As you mentioned, the storm is heavy in Dunhuang. So in situations where wind occurs, a lot of the sands would be blown away on top of the grottos. But walking down here, I haven't felt any sands blown above my head. This is one of the approaches taken to protect. Some of the audience are wondering about the mascot of Dunhuang Mogao Grotto. It is a little dog figure called Le Le. This is also a beloved character. So entering the preserved area, Le Le also understands that it is important to keep out of the protected area. So in the core cultural relic areas, Lolo does not go in. I actually have seen it yesterday. I offered some food and snack to it, but it was just too familiar with me. This is Grotto Number 428, built in North Zhou Dynasty. This is also the central tower structure. Actually, this grotto, compared with the former two, as our audience may understand, by first sight, which are the sides, this is one of the biggest preserved grottos from this dynasty. So entering this, the whole area and whole size is much bigger than the former two grottos that we entered. So after the expansion of the grottos, the content are actually more varied, and the figures are actually very conspicuous. And we can see the obvious Flying Apsaras on north and south side of walls. The Flying Apsaras that we're seeing right now, comparing with the
会发
former
现它的
two,
胸啊、腹啊这些比较凸起的肌块儿
are
对，会非
actually
常的
more
明显。
flexible
其实在这个时
in
候呢，就是我们
figures, but
刚是
for
说到的画
chest
法，在这里呢
and
就是非常流
abdomens,
行的
their
凹凸
muscles
晕
are
染法
more
了。对，这个
conspicuous.
其实呢是西域的
This
凹
is
凸
the
法跟
different
中原的
kinds
晕
of
染合
techniques.
成之后的一种新型的画法。它也可以说是古代工匠根据自己的智慧，将自
This
己
is
所本
one
身
of the
学习的技艺所
collaboration
表
of
现
new
在墙壁
techniques
上。它会把
combining
整个这个人
concave
物呢
and
先分成
convex
几个大体的基块，
from the
分
east
好之
and
后呢，
west.
用同样的颜色
Our
来进
craftsmen
行
have
逐层的
learned
晕染。
from the West
晕染
and they
完
have
毕之后，它会有
embodied
一个非
these
常大的
on
特
top
点，
of the
这个特点
walls.
是什么呢？它会在人物的五官上啊涂上这个白
First,
色
they're
来表
using
示立
big
体感，
figures
就
to
有点像
paint,
我们现在
and
说这
then
个
they
女孩
use
子在化妆时候
color
的样子
dyeing.
了。但是呢，还是会发现说好像都非常的奇怪，
The
因为它
color
们每一
white
个
is
形
used
象，无
in
论是飞
shading
天或者说是下方的这
to
些骨架，
present a
这个五官
3D
啊都非
effect.
常的突出，
This
看
is
上去之
somewhat
后就像
similar
孩子当中
to
的
the
小字
makeup
一
to
样。
girls right
对，
now.
所以也就被人们叫做小字脸。但是如果说我们开
We
玩
can
笑的时候
see
会说
the
什么呢？ 因
face
为它本
of
身这
the
个肤色
celestial
啊
beings
是
are
因为氧
actually
化之
very
后才变
obvious.
灰的，所以有点像我们现在说什么呢？
They
不
look
仅仅要
like
化妆的时候要打
some
高光，
of the
千万不要
Chinese
忘了涂防晒啊。
characters.
所以说如果不涂防晒的话，
The
太黑的
skin
话，整个
color
这个
is
脸啊
actually
我们看
is
到哈，
actually
很多
because of
一
the
会儿咱们再看一
oxidation.
个比较有特点的东西。咱们先看这些飞天呐，它和之前咱们的飞天又不太一样了。之前可能没有看到他们拿到乐器，
Later we
但
will
是
see
现在这
another
些飞天呢手上
distinctive
都拿着琵琶呀、横笛呀、这
feature,
些箜篌啊这样
and
的一
this
些
one
那个乐器。您能跟我们说一下现在大概是？
and these celestial beings are holding different kinds of
上方这
instruments,
四位呢，分别拿的是琵琶、箜篌、横笛，还有
such
最后
as
一位呢
flute.
可能看的不是很清楚，但是大家如果仔细观察的话，它的腰间啊类的。
The 4 Flying Apsaras
吹奏
are
类的，
holding
包括打击
4
类的乐器都已经在
traditional
墙壁上
Chinese
出现了。
instruments.
而在莫高窟当中，像这样的飞天形象，大约出现的是有4500余身，而乐器的种类呢，基本上也是在4500件左右，而种类就比较多，大约是有50余种了。
我们看到哈，
The Flying
现在我们看到的
Apsaras
飞天是
are
褪色氧化后的飞天。
4,500, and the number of instruments actually stay in that number as well. The kinds of instruments can stand up to 50.
对，所以我们现在看到这几身飞天的形象呢，就会非常的协调了。会发现说，它无论是整个肌肤的色彩，包括说它们的五官，会发现说同样也涂了白色。
Flying
就会发现
Apsaras
说
are more
眼睛非常的深
coordinated,
邃，鼻梁呢非常的
including
高
their
挺，会发现说
faces
整个这个形象出
and
现之
their
后呢，相对一张
colors.
不太突兀。所以说，很多时候除了工匠
We
的
can see
精
that
美
their
的
eyes
高超的技巧
are
之外，时间
not
也
that
是一个很
shallow,
重
and
要的
their
以同样的形
noses
象，在不同的时期，经过不同
are
的时间沉淀之后呢，
attractive
展
as
现出来的
well.
风格啊，就会非常的大了。差别
From this, we can see that the
在这个人字
craftsmen
旁
have
边
used different
有好多
techniques
这样的一
and
个
they have matured in painting.
孔雀吧，
对，
还有一些猴子的一些形象，色彩特别好看。
对，而且我们现在看到这样的图案呢，
And I
它
can
其实在
see
动物
some
当中保存下来
other
同样也
animals,
是有
such as this
1500多年
one.
的历史了。
它就是其实起到一个
装饰的作用。
它色彩
A peacock over on the wall. This also dates back to,
是。
it also has a
所以说
history
有
of
些老师会把我们看到这样
1,500
的红
years.
色也就叫做是
This grotto is mainly based on the color red. So seeing the color red like this, we
这
can
供养人
also
在
call
北
it
斗的石窟当中，这
Dunhuang
个
red.
是比较多的吧数量。
大部分都是由这些
The figures
供养
of
人们
patrons
集资所开凿的一个功德
is
性
very
的
much
建筑。
seen.
供养人的
in
数量在
Mogao
莫高窟
grottos.
呢大约是有9000身左右，但
These
是在这个
patrons
428
are
号洞窟当中啊，它占到了将近
helping
1/4，有1200
help
多位的供养人。
These patrons helped building these grottos.
而且如果仔细观察，会发现说前方这几位供养人，甚至连他是谁、从哪
There
儿
are
来、是什么
over
样的身份，都非常的
1,200
清晰。
patrons
而且我们看到第一
appearing
身供养
inside
人
of these
啊，他们叫
grottos.
庆仙。这个庆仙呢，他曾
And
经
some
抄
of
写的
them,
佛经
some of
也在
their
藏经洞
information
当
are
中呢
very
被
clear.
真实地
And
记
the
载。
first one, his name is called Qing Xian.
好的，那现在我们继续
And
往前走
he's-，
看看下一个
His
洞窟是
version of sutra is also excavated. Okay, let's continue on to see the next grotto.
但是这个洞窟稍微保留了一些钱币当中的一部分，它可能
Just now we have entered grottos where on first sight you can see the main grotto, but this one we're entering right now has some collapsed area. According to our research, all the grottos had a decoration front, but because of different reasons, now we have come to grotto number 420. This was built in Sui Dynasty. Okay, now our timeline jumps to Sui Dynasty. Let's see the features of grotto number 420.
很多样的元素在壁画当中啊。是，我觉得像咱们的窟顶就有很多的，包括山水呀、亭台楼阁呀。
On entering the grotto number 420, I see the multiple elements. All these stories are depicted from the walls, and I think many of the audience have found that this one is very distinctive because the height of the grotto is bigger than others. A design like this in ancient times meant richness. On the west side, there is a Buddha, and also two other Buddhas in the south and north side. Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are appearing at the same time. Just now we have seen on top of the ceiling there are different kinds of trees and houses, but if you look more carefully, under these trees and houses there are blue bells under. So these figures with the belts, you can see clearly with the Flying Apsaras, but because of the oxidation of the base colors, you cannot see very clearly. But on the conjuncture part where the ceiling is connecting with the four walls, you can see the stories of sending off and welcoming Buddhas. We can feel the colors are differently used with North Zhou Dynasty. These colors are changed into warm colors. The style of the colors is constructing very clearly with the former ones, and apart from the base colors, there are thousands of Buddhas painted on top of the wall. They're connected together like light beams. Actually, different kinds of dyeing was used, so the decoration is actually more attractive. So from North Liang to North Zhou Dynasty, the Flying Apsaras were not elegant and graceful as this one. In early times, the Flying Apsaras seems more heavy and cumbersome. But in Sui Dynasty, a huge change happened. Their bodies were thinner and they seemed lighter. Also, their belts are flying with the celestial beings together. So in the same time, Apart from the changes in Flying Apsaras, their decorations and costumes have changed as well. Some audiences have been asking that how is the paintings on top of the ceiling is painted? So in earlier times, building the grottos, they would build a little base on the ground, and then according to different kinds of techniques, they would step up on the platform and then draw on the ceiling. It was very uneasy for the craftsmen in earlier times because they had to overcome the natural condition because the lighting inside of the grottos are not as well, and coming out of the grottos we would feel stinging in our eyes. We cannot see clearly, or we cannot even open our eyes after coming out of the grotto. So after entering every grotto, we would have an adaptive process for our eyes and maybe close them for a little bit. Okay, let's go on forward. Before, I was a tourist here, and I remember one guide was advocating to spread across the two sides inside of grottos, but some other guide has suggested that we should stand in the front. That is out of the consideration for air circulation inside of the grottos. There is also another important function. When we clear out of the exit and entrance, the natural light can come in. Another point is that our ancient ancestors have come inside of these grottos, and they could only use the natural light to enjoy and appreciate the morals. Okay, now we're going downward, and we can see some tourists are already inside of the grottos to visit. This is also the first batch of visitors. The size of this grotto is not huge. However, this is one of the most crucial ones in grotto. This was constructed in early Tang Dynasty. So on entering the grotto, we can see the figures of the Buddhas. But these vary differently from the figures that we see normally for the Bodhisattvas. And the higher scale is somewhat like what we have today. This was affected by Hu style. This is an untypical style and grotto, and because of this, this is the only one grotto is preserved to have Hu style figures. Apart from this, there is also another intriguing part of this grotto, as we mentioned before, about the two Flying Apsaras. In Indian myths, these two flying apsaras are actually a couple, so the feature of genders are very distinctive, but later in Chinese descriptions and embodiment, the female gender is more reiterated. So in Tang Dynasty, all the flying apsaras seemed more realistic because it got rid of the effects for the Western influences. By then, the technique was more matured. So Tang Dynasty maiden style was very clear in this grotto. So if you follow the camera to look above on the ceiling, a lot of the flying apsaras actually have a beard. This is very typical in Tang Dynasty. The Tang Dynasty flying apsaras seems lighter and seems more motion than the Sui Dynasty's apsaras. No matter for instrument or the faces, they're more clear. Apart from the decoration, there are also other functions of flying apsaras. On our both hand side, we can see on top of each bodhisattvas, there are flowers being spewed and instruments being played. Also, there are different kinds of environmental situations where trees and flowers appear. So this is a solid foundation for Tang Dynasty's painting. Actually, we can see that the beard and the eyebrows are green. This is the problem of the pigment used back then. The colors actually are different than what people saw thousands of years ago because of the oxidation. Let's go outside. This gate is rather narrow. This is the Hu-style comprehensive grotto. The size is little, but the content is various. This is a prototype of the later paintings. This is also from the Tang Dynasty, but it is one of the peak time. We can see the figures and colors are quite different. From the early Tang Dynasty, I believe some of you have found that the colors are more and more astute, and the style, the decoration, costumes, clothing, and the belts, and the patterns on top of the flying apsaras are more and more complicated.
括人们审美的一个大的改变。
我们看到，包括咱们的照相啊，还有飞天的形象，都会呈现出一个体态丰
There
满
we
的这
can
样的一个
feel
形象。
the
跟当时咱们
change
北魏时
of
期，
people's
那个时候有一
aesthetics
个鲜明的对比哈，那个时候
appreciation
可能说的是一种秀
because we
倾
can
向这样的
see
一个
that
形象。那么在现在呢，就是要体态丰盈，
now people
显得很
more
有那样的一个
like
质感的这样
more
的一个。
对，这个其实也是因为不同时期艺术风格的一个转变。
now people's
所以说
figure
呢，人们
have
审美的不
come
同，也
with
造成
more
了我们现在
texture
看到
and
艺
they
术
have
品它展现
become
出来风格的一个
thicker than before. That is also an
真的是
alteration
就
of
像我
the
们之前说那
aesthetics
句话叫做
appreciation. And
千
then
年
we
文
can
化一脉
see
承，
the
就一脉相承。那么别有洞天
embodiment
韵
on top
就
of
是千年
these
文化
artworks.
一脉相承下来之后呢，在咱们的洞窟当中呈现出来的，又是独特的莫高韵味的壁画。
We can see the thousands of years culture have been embodied very distinctively in Mogao grottos. Okay, let's continue on.
现在呢，其实看完这个盛唐时期洞窟的飞天之后啊，我们就要去看一个时间相对比较晚的洞窟了。其实，在整个莫高窟
Now,
来讲
after
呢，我
seeing
们把
the
洞窟
Flying
当中
Apsaras
飞天
in
的发
Peak
展时期
Tang
大概是分
Dynasty,
成了4个阶段。像我们刚才看到最早
for
的，
the
我们会
whole
把它
Mogao
称作是一个
grottos,
模仿的
we
时
have
期。
divided
而
in
后来呢，
four
在北周、隋，
we
大
have
家会
divided
逐渐
four
把自
groups.
己内心的一些
The
想
first
法
one
添
is
加在绘画当中。这个时候呢，就
implement
出现了创意的萌芽。再往后方，我们刚才看到的这个唐代
imitating
呢，就是
period,
到达
the
了一个
second
高峰
period
了。
where
但是高
people
峰之后
infuse
呢，
their
可能
own
它就会有
thoughts
一
and
定程度的下降。
imagination.
所以现在呢，我们
For
要
the
去看的
third
是
period
敦
in
煌
Tang
洞窟，它是
Dynasty,
一
the
个
peak time,
宋代的洞窟。
the peak time came.
现在眼尖的网友啊，
And for
看
the
到了咱们
fourth
洞窟当中啊，有
period
一些就是一些
is
监测
the
的仪器
Grotto Number
跟大家说一下
55.
有哪
The period has lowered
其实呢，
in
我
the
们在整个洞窟当中，首要的呢是对于整个
in the
洞窟
quality.
当
Now
中
we
安
have
全
a
的一
few
个检测。
monitoring
所以呢，我们
facilities
会发现说，所有洞窟
inside
都
of the
是有门
grottos.
窗的。
First and
如果大家
foremost,
来到莫
the
高窟之后呢，
security
都是跟着
detection
讲
is
解
very
员，
important
然后
for
呢，
each
一
and
波一波
every
按批次
grottos.
整齐的进入洞窟参观。而且呢，除了这个洞窟的安全之外，每个
If
门
we
上
come
方它都
to
会有这
Mogao
样的类
grottos,
似报警。
visitors
至于
would
说
have
除
to
了
follow
文物
the
的安全
guides.
之外，我们对于整个
Apart
洞
from the
窟当中
security
微环境的
reasons,
监测也
there
是
are
实时的
electrical
在保持。
alarming on
它会
top
有一
of
些小的
each
仪器，
gate.
像有一些洞窟可能会有二氧化
Also,
碳、
we're
温湿
monitoring
度的
the
监测仪器。
micro
有一些洞
environment.
窟呢可能会
Some
有
little
降
gadgets are
尘
used
监测
for
仪器，包括呢在
detecting
一些洞窟当中
humidity,
甚至同样也
CO2,
会有我们所说的空气质量监
and
测。
some of the
所以
grottos
这个也
have
是咱们洞窟
dust
保护当中的一
detection.
项非常非常重要的一个环节
Also,
啊。
the air
就
quality
是人会很多的话，
control.
比如说它的二氧化碳含量过多的话，它就会
This
引
is
起
one
报
of
警。
the most
对，所以说
crucial
我们在看到洞窟当中
approach
这些
in
非常小
protecting
的
and
仪器啊，它
preserving
其实
because
帮到了
when
非常
tourists
大的
come
忙。
to
因为呢，
tourist
在
number
夏
come
天，比如
too
说
high,
超大客流的情
the
况下，洞窟
CO2
当
gadget
中
would
人
alarm
流
off.
过多，而它的承载能力又有限的情况
In
下，
summer
这些仪
times
器呢
where
会发出警
visitors
报。
come in
发出
huge
警报之
numbers
后
and
呢，当我们的
batches,
控制中心
the
接到警报
capacity
之后，
of
我们会把
grottos
洞
are
窟临时关
actually
闭，直到它
not
下
that
次
much,
可以再
so
次
the alarm
对外
would
开
go
放，
off,
让游人参观的时候呢，我
and
们会
then
把
we
它
would
打开，最
temporarily
大限度的是文物的一
close
个非
the
常严密的
grotto
保护。
也
until
就
it
是
is
说，
ready
现
for
在
visitors
很多
again.
游客还是会选择在夏天的时候来到咱们洞窟参观。
And we can
其
protect
实
the
啊，我们可
cultural
以倡议
relics
一
as
下大
much
家
as
大家
possible.
看一下今天我们
Some
所有的环境，
some
现在已经开始
spectators
接待游
would
客了。
choose
在昨
to
天的这
come
台游客
here
的数
in
量当中
summers,
只有
but
500多人。
here we can
那
advocate
在夏天
that
的时候，最高的客流量能够达。
actually in yesterday there were only around 500 of tourists, but in summer times the number jumps up.
刚才网友说啊，我们在直播当中一共3个人，但只有2个人说话哈。其实不是啊，就是咱们的女讲解员呢，她其实是跟我们一块进行这样的一个同步讲解，然后在这个直播当中啊，她如果发现有她特别注意的点，平时注意的特别多的点，她会跟大家进行一个分享。今天主讲的呢还是咱们的陆老师哈，
So the main speaker
就我们两
today
个一
is
起
Mr.
来进行
Lu,
同步的这样一
and
个
together the two of us will
讲解。
talk to you through the grottos.
现在看到的洞窟呢，它并不是
In
说
fact,
按
the
照
grottos
朝
that
代
we're
顺
seeing
序
right now
而进行编号
is
的，
not
它是按照它的
ordered
位置。
by
所
the
以说在这里呢，我
dynasties.
们在去55号洞窟
It
之
is
前呢，
numbered by
还在
its
249号
location.
西魏的这个洞窟呢，
So
先做
before
一
we
个简单的
went
预热。
to the number 55,
西魏时期的洞窟，
and we're now entering
这个
number
也是咱们传说当中殿堂式
249
步骤
from
运行哈。
对，
Western Wei Dynasty.
这里的飞天形象其实也是很具体的。刚才呢，
The
其实
figures
我们
of
说到了
Flying
正常的
Apsaras
习惯
are
在这里
specific
呢
as
我们
well.
再去看一下
Now,
相对比较
just
早
now
期
we
的
were
相对比较
speaking
早期的
about the
网友
peak
刚刚
Tang
进入咱们的直播
Dynasty's
平台
Flying
了解
Apsaras.
前
Now
期
this
的
is
这个
an early
飞天
image
形象
of
是这样
Flying
的。那现
Apsaras.
在我们进行一个补充，来
Maybe
到
some of the
24 洞
audience have
窟
just
看
come
一下
into our
这西魏
broadcast
时期
and
飞天
hasn't
形象是
realized
一样的，跟刚才
about
这个
the Flying Apsaras in earlier times, so we can have a contrast between the different times of
风格
Apsaras.
上会稍许
So
有一点点的差别。
comparing with the
但是在我
North
们
Wei
看到的第
Dynasty, there is
249
a
号洞
slight
窟当中最
difference,
特别的部
but
分，就是在左
inside
右手
this
两边
Grotto
说
Number
法图当中啊，它的这个飞天呢是
249,
对称的形式，
the one
而且
special
出现之
feature is
后呢，
that
会发现上
the
下
two
一共是有
sides
4身儿，
between
可是这4身儿飞
our
天呢，
each hands
它无论是姿态，包括呢它整个人物的着装，
are
甚至说给我们
symmetry
的
to
感
each
觉呢，
other,
会有一个非
and
常
the
大的差
four
别。
Flying Apsaras
对，
on
像我
each
们
side
今天看到
have
上方
a
这两身
different
穿红
influence
色长
for
袍的飞天
clothing.
呢，会明显的感
For
觉
these
它会
two
有一
we're
种汉
seeing
式的一个
now
风格。而
wearing
下方看到的一
red
穿衣服
robes,
或者说
they
上半
seem
身半裸
more
的飞天
like
形
in
象，
Tang
会有浓
Dynasty,
浓的
but the
西
two
服风格。
below
尤其是我
with
们
a
看到在右手边的
semi-suit
这身飞天呢，
costume,
会
they
感觉说
look
还是会
more
比较的
like
笨重，但
Western
是腰身啊就
styles.
会非常的柔软。
纤细。
对，你会发现它飞过来之后啊，整个
Their
这
whole
个
body may
腰
seem
子
a
啊
little bit
转
heavier,
身之
but
后，这
the
个腿啊
waist
它
part
是搭了过来。
is lighter
但
and
是呢，这
smoother.
个比例上可能就不是非常的协调了，所以你会发现它的这个脚，甚至说跟这个脸
The
看
rate,
上去呢，
the
会有点
proportion
不
and
一样的
ratio
地
is
方。
not
所以就是说在
coordinated.
当时的这个
His
绘画
feet
当中啊，其
and
实它
his
并没有
face
那么
looks
完全的这样的一个
similar in
在
size.
比例的这样的一个
Therefore, we can see that the
刚才看到可能最写实的呢，
proportion
就是来
is
自于
not
唐朝时期的
established very well
它也是
in
比
that
较世俗
dynasty.
化的一个形象特征。
对，
So in
在
Tang
唐
Dynasty,
代所有的飞天形象
the Flying Apsaras are more secular,
进行了一个朝代的一个影响，包括文化艺术的影响
and
的
from
一
the
个改变。
accumulation of artistry and the dynasties,
莫高窟保存下来这样
the figures and patterns have changed.
国造像旁边的这样的一个火焰纹的一个形式。
对，其实很多网友呢看到我们身后佛身后的这个火焰纹啊，应该会
Seeing
感觉
behind the
亲切，
Buddha's
因为在08年北京奥运会的时候，
fire
宝拉
pattern,
头上的这个火焰纹的形
some
象
of us may feel very familiar because
但
the
是呢，因为我们
mascots
现在看到的
of
这个火焰纹呢，它
2008
是会相对
Beijing
比较
Olympic
早，
Games
所以色
are
彩上来
actually
讲会
very
相
similar
对
to
比
this
较
one,
冷色调
but
为
this
主，
one
而且
is
火焰
very
出现
early
之
in
后，每
time,
一个光
so
圈儿
the
非常的整
colors
齐，
have been
而且排列
mainly
当中呢
focused
会有
on
向上
cold
窜的那种感
colors.
觉。而在这个隋朝和唐朝时期呢，这个火焰纹啊，它就
The
会显得
patterns
更
are
加真
neat
实，好
and
像是穿透
regular,
了火苗，在这个佛身后熊熊燃烧
but
一
in
样。
Sui Dynasty and Tang Dynasty, the fire seems more blazing and more vivid.
对，在这里呢，我们就
As
看
we
到
can
的是
see
来
in
自
the
中国传统
murals,
神
there
话
are
传说当中
4
的风雷
gods
电四位
in
神将。
traditional
所以在这
Chinese
里呢，因为
myths.
古人可能对于很多自
The
然
gods
现
of
象没有一个非
wind, the
常
gods
科
of
学的
rain,
合
the
理的
gods of
解释，
thunder, and
所以
gods
说
of
他们会
lightning.
用自己的想
There is
象，
no
然后呢，把他们
scientific
赋予生
explanation
命
in
之后，
ancient
这样的
times,
人物形象
so
就
the
展现
people
了出
in
来，
the
创造了
past
出
have
来。而这样
imagined
的形象呢，也
and
跟
they have
着
created
传统文
these
化就
gods,
进入到了洞窟当中。
And
所以大家会
according
发现说，我们看到这个洞窟
and
之内
together
会有
with
方方
the
面面内容的
traditional
一个聚
culture
合，
they have
因此
entered the
它也是
grottos.
我们看到
This
佛
is
教
the
文化之
integration
后在洞
and
窟当中最集中的
convocation
一个体现。
of Buddhism introduced to China.
一些形象呢也刻在了墓当中。
The figures of the mythology in the past have also been put onto the Moros. That is also another integration and communication between the East and West. Now we're going for Grotto Number 55. It is built in Song Dynasty.
但是呢，我们说在莫高窟
This is also the grotto where we can see that is closest with us in time. However, it still has over 1,000 years of
我现在
history.
一直手上拿的是手机，就是大家一定要跟我
I
进
am
行多一些
holding
的
my
互动。
phone right
有什么
now.
问题呢？
Please interact with me, audiences. If you have any questions, you can post to me.
的感觉是好
So
像是
seeing
他
all
从
these
一个
grottos today, including
少
the
年
Grotto
长
Number
成了一
55
个
in
壮
Song
年，然后呢
Dynasty,
最
I
后
can
会
feel
有
that
少年哈这样的一个，但是其实
it's
啊，
like
我觉得每个时
it's
代
like a
的
child
艺术，
growing
飞
into
天也
an
好，艺术
adult
也好，
and
其实
then
它
going
不
to
存
the
在衰
older
败这样的一
stage
说，它
in
其实是每
life.
个朝代特
So
有的
no
这样的一
matter
个
for artistry,
特
there
点
is
啊特
no
征。我觉得
decomposing
这个是
or
每个朝代都特别珍贵的
there
一
is
个
different styles and features in each and every dynasty. This is a precious memory. After the appearance of Flying Apsaras, it is not only symbols, it is the figures decided by different kinds of collection of cultures. As one of our historians said, the Flying Apsaras will not disappear in our lives. They will always live in people's hearts. And the Flying Apsaras have
然后
landed
今天也可
here
以说啊，
from
就
the
是我们
heaven
进行了
and
一
they
个
are
巡礼飞
bringing
天的这样的
the
一个
aesthetics
直播。
appreciation to
在
us.
这些过程当中呢，网友也
Now
积极的
today
参与了
we
咱们的互
have
动啊。那么在之后的就明天或者是后天的
broadcast
直播，咱
about
们可以预
Flying
告哈，
Apsaras
还会有进行
in
这样的一个同
tomorrow's
步的
or the
直
day
播。
after
下一个主
tomorrow's
线呢是以时间为
live
主，不同朝代
streaming,
的
there
塑
will
像啊、
also
衣着呀，
be
包括它建窟的时间呐，包括
there
它的一
also
个
will be
什么
my
用途的一个
introduction
造
for
型风
you
格呀，各种方面我们都会去说
according
到。
to
所以呢，请
different
锁定咱们的视频
timeline
频道啊，继
and
续看到咱
costumes
们之
and
后的直
features.
播。
Please stay tuned with CCTV and see our later broadcasts. Please pay
谢
attention
谢大家，
to
大家
the
也要积极的去参与到咱们的动物保护当中，为咱们的千年
Please
文化做上自己
actively
分享自
engage
己的
in
一
the
份力量吧。
protection of grottos
好的，谢谢大家，今
and
天直播
putting
到此结束。
your effort for the thousand years of cultural politics.
飞天